Support for the Forward's Bintel Brief podcast comes from listeners like you and from Edward Blank, whose generosity makes this program possible.
Okay.
All right, you want to go first?
I'll go first. Hi, I'm Gina Green.
I'm Lynn Harris. We are going to be answering questions every week, and we want to answer your question. Please send any and all inquiries or requests for advice, anything you need to know about, your hopes, your fears, your dreams, whatever you want to share, do not hold back.
And welcome to A Bintel Brief, the podcast, the newest home for the Forward's 115-year-old advice column, where we answer your life questions with a Jewish twist. This week's question, Lynn, comes from an area that a lot of us are getting familiar with. Well, all working adults are familiar with hiring and firing and getting jobs. And with the economy and the workplace in such flux, there's a lot of movement going on. People trying to find new positions and getting new work. And today's letter writer is in exactly that scenario. Dear Bintel, I asked someone who was a mentor from my past job to be a reference. And I found out afterward that her reference was the main reason I did not get the position. She is a very powerful person in this area and across multiple industries. I don't know what specific feedback was provided and was dismayed to hear that someone who I thought was an advocate gave me a negative reference. Should I reach out to her to seek clarification or try to move on? How do I avoid using her as a reference in the future? Signed, Qualified Applicant.
Awkward.
Yeah.
Oh, man. This is some sort of middle school, high school, almost like breakup level feels here. Like, but we just had that romantic dinner,
right.
Like I thought everything was okay. I so feel this person's feelings. Oh, man. And with such consequence. In middle school, there's certainly consequences, but they may not be consequences. Where in this case, there may well have been real consequences. That's
real consequences. And, for me, Qualified Applicant really spoke to me because I was in a very similar position many, many years ago where I was looking for a job. I was in the final rounds of a position and found out from the manager, they said, your former employer did not give you the greatest reference. And he let me know that, which was great because I also got the job. It didn't Qualified Applicant, unfortunately, did not get the job, but my boss gave me the job despite that. But I still had the same feeling. And so the consequences, I didn't have any consequences, right? But because once I heard those words, everything changed about my perception of my relationship with this person, just like Qualified Applicant who said, this person was a mentor. My former boss was a mentor as well. In fact, even more than that, I went to her son's bar mitzvah and I babysat her kids for years. So we had a real relationship that wasn't even just across work. So Qualified Applicant, I see you, I feel you, and there's a lot at play here.
I mean, if you babysit our kids, that kind of, to me, that's like end of story. You'd recommend them for any job, you trust them with your kids. You can trust them with your spreadsheets, but it's like, kicked away.
Was that Valerie?
No, Valerie is sound asleep. Valerie is a cat, one of two. She gives excellent references, by the way. But one thing that strikes me is if this person was a mentor, let's interrogate the meaning of the word mentor.
Yeah. I mean, but then it's like, well, what does Qualified Applicant think a mentor is?
Right. And then you get into, in terms of expectations, when, if someone asks you for a reference, the expectation is that you're going to give them a good reference. That's the handshake, right? Obviously, there are alternatives. I will mention a colleague of my dad's. My dad always loves to tell this story. They would all get asked for recommendations. It was a small department. They would get asked for recommendations. And in some cases, this one professor in particular, was not always feeling it, but he didn't want to say no. So he used to say these artful things in recommendations that he was reluctant to give, such as only a candidate of so-and-so's caliber could ... which means doesn't say the caliber's good. Leave it empty. Don't hire this.
Yes. And I mean, but that illustrates the wide range of what is offered and received in reference world.
Yes.
That position that I was talking about from years ago, that was in a legal setting. I've worked in a lot of legal settings around a bunch of lawyers. My mom's a lawyer, been around them and worked with them for most of my adult life in some capacity. And lawyers might be like, listen, I'm not going to say anything other than that you worked here was your title, and these were the principal responsibilities of your role. Or not even all of that. They might just say, I know person XY, they worked here from January 2015 to December 2020 or whatever, right? So and that's all they'll say. And it's not a negative reference, but it's kind of like a non-reference.
But what I think what's really important is that there's actually a lot wrapped up in what someone or what a company, what an employer or former employer is allowed to share and willing to share. There is a lot to be said about the information that we share. And I can understand employers not wanting to get into the business of giving a negative reference at all, because I don't want anyone to say that I slandered them or what have you. And so who knows? In the Jewish perspective on this, what does it mean to be saying things that aren't nice about people? I think a lot about Lashon Hara as a concept. And, literally it means evil tongue, but in common vernacular, it's become gossip. And I remember my old rabbi used to say, just don't talk about people. Don't talk about other people, good or bad. Just don't talk about them. And I think that is such a really meaty question that we're dealing with today, because there is such a wide space in the reference world for what's good, what's bad, what are you obligated to do or not do. There's just a lot of room for interpretation. We'll be right back after a short break.
I'm Jody Rudoran, Editor-in-Chief of The Forward. Every day, my team of creative, passionate journalists works to understand and explain our complex and diverse Jewish world, to cover the rise in anti-Semitism, the changing discourse around Israel, the new trends in Jewish books, film, and food. We're carrying on a 124-year tradition of holding power to account and helping American Jews explore our identities, but we're doing it in new ways that work across generations. If you want to keep up with what American Jews are talking about, sign up for our free email newsletters. Just go to forward.com/newsletters.
So we have invited a special and very knowledgeable guest to help us work through our question. She is Executive Vice President of Social Impact for Geben Communication. She founded the award-winning social impact agency Women Online and its database of women influencers, The Mission List, which Geben acquired in 2021. She hosts the Anxious Achiever podcast for Harvard Business Review, which you should definitely listen to. And she's the author of Hiding in the Bathroom, How to Get Out There When You'd Rather Stay Home. Please welcome Maura Ahrens-Mele.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Sure.
So Maura, a qualified applicant had a very specific question about what to do with this reference, bad reference, not getting a job. But it's also one piece of a big puzzle around jobs and work and the workplace and who we are. And I want to ask first, what is your first reaction?
I feel her pain because what I'm sensing is she is sitting in a pool of anxiety, asking herself all these questions. Wait a minute. What? This woman, did she always think I was bad? Like, how did this happen? How did I miss all these signals? And then she's thinking, oh my God, I probably have to confront her. And I don't want to do that. I'm scared to do that. And she probably just wants to make the whole thing disappear. And then she also sounds like she wanted a job that she didn't get. So
Right.
I feel for you, qualified.
Right. She also mentioned that this person is very influential across multiple industries. So how do we hold all of those things that are causing that pool of anxiety? There's a lot in there. Is it just hard to go to work? Is it just hard to be in the workplace? Is that what, yeah. It just seems like maybe the whole system is hard and rigged for all of us.
Well, people are hard. I mean, I don't know about you, but relationships are hard. Fortunately or unfortunately, work is all about relationships. Mm-hmm. And qualified had a relationship that she was counting on. And for whatever reason, that relationship really did not go the way she thought it was. And she's hurt probably. So yes, these things are really hard. And I will say that one of the things that is hardest for anybody, whether you consider yourself the most confident, extroverted person in the world, or whether, like me, you tend to be a ball of mush and a lot of anxious feelings, is confronting someone who is powerful, influential, has levers over your future possibly, is really hard.
I wonder, but we also go to work in this place. This goes back to your question, Gina. We also go to work, many of us, in a place where we kind of aren't supposed to have feelings. And we're kind of not supposed to show feelings. We're just supposed to put our heads down and work and just do the job. But you also said work is about relationships, which it really is. So to you, can you talk a little bit about that? Like, how do we sort of allow for us to be human at work?
Well, there's a line, right? Because we all have boundaries, and especially at work where we are colleagues, right? We need to respect each other's boundaries because people get really uncomfortable. We all know that feeling when someone sort of overshares or brings too much raw emotion into the room when it doesn't quite feel like the time or place. So I want to acknowledge that. But Lynn, I actually have to disagree with you that we're not supposed to feel feelings at work. Mm-hmm. I actually think that's changed a lot. I think that certainly in a typical sort of professional business atmosphere, there is the expectation. And in some instances, there probably still is. But for all we know, she's a therapist. I think that there is an acknowledgement that we are human. And certainly if the pandemic has done anything, it's been horrible. But the one silver lining I see is that for those of us who have had to show up and work throughout all of this, whether it's on Zoom or in person, we have had no choice but to let our humanity show. I think that work is very broken because a lot of the systems in our society that create the hierarchies that drive work are really broken.
I was going to say, what are some of those? Can we get into like the top three or the bottom three, however we might want to talk about them? What are some of the systems and the hierarchies that really get us into trouble?
Patriarchy. Can we start with that one?
Yes, we can. We can start with patriarchy. It comes straight away.
But patriarchal systems ultimately imply someone is at the top and a lot of people are at the bottom. Certainly in Western culture, in most office jobs, that's how it is. And we sort of accept it. Like you come to work young in your career, you take a lot of, can I curse on this podcast?
That's a good question. Depends what curse, probably.
The S word, but you take a lot of S. And then, eventually, hopefully you get enough power so that, you can give people S and they do what you tell them to do. Like that's been the traditional, let's face it, model, certainly of corporate America. And that doesn't work for most people. And so this person, it sounds like this mentor, maybe you worked for her. Maybe she was the big boss and she was your mentor and you invested a lot of ego in her. You invested feeling in her. You wanted validation from her because that's how it works in a hierarchy. Someone's at the top and if they shine a good light on you, you feel great. And then all of a sudden you don't feel great. And that's what she's dealing with right now.
What about the part of the system that also where references are king? And I do mean king as a segue from patriarchy. I mean, that's a whole system that is just made of privilege. How does just this whole kind of like ceremony, like both meaningful and like ceremonial ritual of references help us or hurt us?
It's funny, Lynn, I never thought about that. Normally, I just check someone's references and I always assume references are going to be great because like, why would you write to this woman's point? Like, why would I give someone's name if they're going to say bad things about me? I always thought it was kind of a formality.
Well, I mean, it depends, right? There's sometimes it's to confirm that you work somewhere and, sure. And then there's, I don't want to call them entirely like vanity references, but they're the kind of references that like one might be able, I'm thinking about it because we know that this referrer is influential, right? And so then there are also the kind of vanity references, even though they may be real, truly people who will speak to your good qualities and recommend you, but that you kind of also just want to put their name on your reference list. Are there elements of that system that are part of what you call broken?
Absolutely. I think a lot of things about hiring are broken, but on the other hand, what's the alternative? Checking someone's social media? I'm not sure that that's reliable either. So,
right.
And I understand the impulse. If you have someone who's really powerful who you think is going to say great things about you, you should use that. That's a competitive advantage, frankly. The key here is, where's the disconnect? Why did the mentor not say good things, and how come this person had no idea?
Yes. And I think more that goes back to what you lifted up very at the beginning of our conversation around relationships, right? So, what was the relationship like between qualified applicant and the mentor? That is like just such a huge question for me in the grappling with this letter, because there is so much weight and gravity and energy that we put into relationships. And obviously, qualified applicant had put so much into this one. She felt there was something to be returned back to her. If we're in the workplace and we're putting in energy and time and feelings into relationships, what do we get to expect? Are we owed something from our relationships in the workplace beyond a finished PowerPoint on time and a returned email? I kind of want to ask a question about relationships in the workplace and the boundaries around them. It's like, what do we get to expect from people?
I think a lot of us expect to be hurt, and that makes me sad. I interviewed the author Roxane Gay on my podcast recently, and she has a column, an advice column in the New York Times called Work Friend. And she said that most of the letters that she gets are people who are not complaining about the work. They're not complaining about what they actually are hired and paid to do. They're complaining about the way they are treated by other people in the office. And that we have to come to a place where everyone is deserving of basic human dignity and basic manners like you learned in kindergarten. And the biggest sadness about work in our country right now is that we do not treat each other like human beings on so many levels across workplaces. It is truly toxic. And so I would say that the basic thing that you need to expect from your colleagues is that they will treat you like a human being.
You just lifted up, maybe qualified applicant had been like harmed, traumatized, abused by this mentor. We don't know what the past was like, right? But we know that right now she definitely felt a harm. She definitely felt impact of that harm, material, in fact, because it appears she did not get a job that she wanted as a result. How do we recover from that type of blow, which for qualified applicant was on multiple levels, right? Financial, didn't get the job. Emotional, right? Emotional, felt probably some betrayal. Like, what does recovery look like for not just for workers for whom something like this happened, but just for people when folks that we trust and loved and appreciated and are grateful for let us down?
Well, this is where it gets hard, because she has to confront this person.
So I sort of had a selfish reason for asking that question, because I had a similar story as to qualified applicant. Actually, as part of the preparation for this podcast, I reached out to this person with whom I had maintained a relationship with, but did not speak of what happened many, many years ago. In preparation for this podcast, I reached out to her and I said, hey, remember that job I applied for about 11 years ago? And we ended up being in the same field again because of that role. And remember, and I said, my boss told me that you gave me a negative reference. And she said, oh, I didn't actually. I just gave one of the standard, this person worked here for this period of time references. And my boss perceived it as a negative reference because it wasn't positive.
Are you telling me that
it was neutral?
Lived in this kind of weird limbo with this person for 11 years? This is reminding me of like one of those romantic comedies where the couple's meant to meet and they miss each other by 5 minutes for a really stupid reason.
That makes me think of another question about kind of the system of work versus the fact that humans are in that system. Maura, you were saying that many workplaces are, not all, of course, not enough, let's put it this way, not enough workplaces are like aggressively organized around the idea of the culture of treating everyone as human. And so then I wonder, if our letter writer had this experience, Gina had this experience, to what degree do you think people, individualize experiences and maybe blame themselves for experiences that are actually kind of a product of a given workplace practice or culture?
Part of the work of truly growing up and coming into yourself is learning to separate yourself from the system, right? Differentiation. Like maybe this opportunity and just getting older, which is such a wonderful thing, gives you the opportunity to step back and say, this happened. This is a ridiculous story, that it was just a formality, blah, blah, blah. I think the good news is that things are changing and that we are learning to look beyond where you went to school and do you fit a certain mold and does your name sound right, and so I think that's the good news. I think, I work in the space of neurodiversity and mental health. And I think the fact that recruiters are so much more educated now on diversity of every kind, and that there is a general movement towards accepting that diversity is a good thing is amazing. And that will hopefully impact the system positively. But we are all humans who come from our dysfunctional families of origin and have our biases and have our neuroses. And that's why I want everyone to have a therapist on staff, because I think that, as well trained as we are sometimes the victim of our own biases and our own hangups. And so I think that as long as the system is dependent on a reference from one person, that's a bad thing.
Maura, it was really a pleasure having you on today.
Absolutely.
What should qualified applicant do here? I mean, there's so much mystery around what actually happened. And if she didn't have the chance to learn from mentor before, maybe now is that chance. Send her an email, find her on LinkedIn.
Well, that's interesting because I was thinking in my head about how to say it, because, it would obviously need to start, maybe not obviously, but you could start with an email that just said, hey, we haven't been in touch for a minute, wanted to connect, and not necessarily disclose that that you didn't get a role because of a reference from her. And just say, let's talk about things. I'm in the middle of a job search, et cetera. And then I think there is one piece to be concerned about, which is the potential of, or the expectation around confidentiality.
Yeah, that's smart. You don't want any enough bridges have been burned in this scenario.
Exactly.
We're going to see which ones.
So she needs to do her recon, right? She needs to, figure out who's who, what's what, before reaching out, so she has all of her ducks in a row ahead of that conversation.
We're going to be answering your questions and queries and requests for advice every week, so please send them to us. Give us all the deets. Do not hold back, because we're the ones who can edit. We want to discuss, we want to dig in, we want to do textual interpretation because we're Jews, and we want to help you. So please send us your questions at bintel@forward.com or call us, because when you leave us a voicemail, you might be able to appear on the podcast. Pencils out for the number 201-540-9728.
I'm Rachel Fishman-Feddersen, publisher and CEO of The Forward. If you like this podcast, the best way to support it is to donate to The Forward. We're a reader-supported nonprofit, and we can't survive without you. Please go to forward.com/donate today.
This podcast is a product of The Forward. Our editor-in-chief is Jody Rudoran, and our CEO and publisher is Rachel Fishman-Feddersen. This show is produced by Wonder Media Network, and our producer is Ira Simonson. Our production assistant is Carmen Borga Carrillo. Our executive producer is Jenny Kaplan. Special thanks again to Edward Blank, whose generosity makes this show possible.